I had somebody come in and tell me how they had found a student rental house with 15 cats. She came to the landlord with an itemized letter, and it had listed every cat's name and what it did for her emotional needs.
Welcome to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association, providing benefits and services to real estate investors and rental property owners for over 48 years. With your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group.
This episode is sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And Rod Cleef's Multifamily Boot Camp, happening May 1st through 3rd in Orlando, Florida. Go to rodsbootcamp.com and use the code RPOA to save $100. So what do you do as a landlord if you have a no-pet policy and your tenant comes to you and says that they need an emotional support animal? Now, what if that animal happens to be a pig or a goat or a bat? As crazy as it sounds, this is happening to landlords, and it's protected by laws and rules and regulations. And so part of the RPOA's mission is to fight these types of laws that are adverse to rental property owners' ability to control the well-being of their property and business. And helping us fight these laws here in Michigan is Tabitha Zimny, an Associate Lobbyist for Karoub Associates out of Lansing, Michigan. Also joining us is Clay Powell, Director of the Rental Property Owners Association of Michigan and Grand Rapids. And Clay has been known to be an advocate for landlords on the local level as well. Tabitha and Clay, welcome to the show.
Hey, good morning, Brian. It's great to be back with you.
Nice to be here for the first time.
It's always great to talk about what the RPOA is doing for landlords. Tabitha, tell us a little bit about your relationship with the Rental Property Owners Association and what you typically do on their behalf.
So I am actually a former landlord, grew up in the business, cut my teeth painting houses, rental houses for my parents in East Lansing, and found out firsthand just how much students can destroy. And then I have been with Karoub Associates for 18 years, representing Rental Property Owners Association of Michigan, all of those 18 years, along with several of my partners. Together, we have 9 full-time lobbyists and have represented the association, RPOA of Michigan, for well over 20 years now. So I advocate on the behalf of all the landlords of Michigan and small business owners, as they are, in a variety of capacities, including with the legislature, with the governor's office, and with the various departments of the state.
And Clay, tell us how important it is for the Rental Property Owners Association to advocate for landlords and rental property owners and to work with lobbyists like Tabitha to help shape legislation.
Well, a lot of people may not know this, but there is no other association in the state of Michigan that is working on landlords and real estate investors' behalf. You, of course, who have realtors and other organizations, but they all have their own agendas. So we are really the only organization that looks out for the landlord's interest and real estate investors' interest in the state of Michigan. In order to do that, we have the state organization, as you mentioned, the RPOA of Michigan. That organization hires Karoub Associates, and then Tabitha is the person that they assign to work with us. So she's our lobbyist in Lansing. We meet on about an every other month basis as a group in the Lansing area and formulate what our priorities are going to be and work with Tabitha on legislation that may bubble to the surface that might be adverse to our industry, and we'll work on killing that legislation, or at least, at the very least, trying to modify that legislation in a way that doesn't impact the industry. So that's how we work. It's really important to work together on these issues, and there is opportunities for us also to come up with proactive legislation, things that we see that needs to be changed. Sometimes that's something that needs to be changed at the state level that exists already, or it might be because certain things are happening at the local level that are beginning to impact what we do as a business. And one of those big issues, and I'm sure we'll talk about it later, is short-term rentals. Every community has an idea about how that's supposed to happen. So we're working on that issue at the state level to try to level the playing field across the state. So no matter where you're at, you'll know what the rules are.
Well, let's start with what
we've accomplished, or what you've accomplished, Tabitha, on behalf of the RPOA and landlords across the state. Give us some of your greatest hits from the past couple of years.
I think my favorite all time has been the rental inspection law. So when we first started, the rental inspection law absolutely favored municipalities. There were a lot of detrimental provisions to landlords that meant that municipalities were coming into properties very frequently. There wasn't a lot of oversight to the amount of money that they were charging to the landlords, including registration fees. Together, Clay and I have been able to completely recraft that law to make sure that it is optional, meaning municipalities can choose to have a rental inspection law, but they don't have to have one. They only have to have a mechanism to respond to complaint. It's not to make rental housing less safe. It is absolutely to make sure that the cities and municipalities and the landlords can work together in tandem to bring the best housing forward for the community, instead of it being one-sided. We were able to extend the time period between inspections, making sure as well to protect not patient privacy, but tenant privacy. So if a tenant refuses to have an inspection, the municipality cannot go in under the landlord's authority to enter into the property. So we were preserving our legal right to enter the property as the property owner, but also making sure that we didn't put the tenant in a precarious position by a municipality coming in under our authority. We have made sure that there are some really common sense provisions in that law and just made it better overall so that we are working well with municipalities, and it's more of an equal playing field where we both have recognized that we're important members to creating affordable housing in the various areas around the state. We've had a lot of fun ones. I mean, the emotional support animals, I think, has been a pretty interesting one, and that's a current bill that we're working on, but it's been really fun to work on and hear the actual stories and hear how law can, and changes in state law can really affect the day-to-day operations of all of our members around the state. We've done so many things over the last 20 years. It's hard to remember all of them. I think it's just been a continual chipping at the rental inspection law, but we've killed a lot of bills, including repeals of rent control that would have been detrimental to the effects on the rental industry. We've made sure that any of those bills that have come forward for domestic violence survivors, making sure that they have safe housing if they are in apartment complexes or rental housing, that when there are bills that are put forward that way, that they take into account what we have as landlords have the capacity to do and not put sort of undue hardships on the landlord, but making sure that the tenant is in fact safe. So most of all, I think we've just really influenced a lot of legislation to make it better for housing in Michigan.
So there are a lot of things, Brian, that that I get excited about that we've done over the years. I've been working with the RPOA of Michigan for about 21 years now, and some of the things I think of that we've done in the past that have really helped landlords. So one, we've been involved, actually responsible for the allowable costs that you can collect for attorney's fees after an eviction case. In fact, I think we'll probably be going back after that again.
So as a landlord, if you have to spend a lot of money on your attorney, you can get that back out of the tenant that you might be
right.
evicting.
So this next go around, I think we're going to approach it a little differently. We've been changing the amount. It's currently $75 for a hearing, $150 for a trial, which is almost laughable at this point, right? So there needs to be some kind of escalation clause, I guess, in there. If each time that the fees continue to go up over the years, that there ought to be an adjustment, just like there is for the small claims limit now. You adjust up ever so many years so that we don't have to keep going back over and over and over again to ask for a new dollar amount. Another one that wasn't within the last couple of years, but certainly within the recent history, is in the inspection law that Tabitha was talking about. Before, municipalities were required, as she mentioned, to do an inspection if you're a certain city or a township of a certain size or within contiguous connection to another large city. So you no longer have to do that, but also under the old rule, you had to inspect at least every 3 years. So we got that changed because we've been going around to municipalities, like in my position here in Grand Rapids, we were going to the city of Grand Rapids saying, why do you need to be in a wonderful property, especially maybe a property that's been built in the last 10 years, every 2 years? It just makes no sense. It's a waste of public resources. It's just a frustration to everybody, including the tenants, to be bothered that often with inspections. And they agreed with us that you're right. We shouldn't have to be in there that often, but the state says we have to be. So we were able to change that in two different ways. And the first way we did that was to allow inspections at intervals up to every 6 years. So almost immediately, the city of Grand Rapids looked at their current regulations and said, we're going to put in an interval 2, 4, and 6, depending on the condition of the property and where things are at. So you can get a 6-year certification on a rental house here in Grand Rapids now, where you couldn't do that before. So it's a big improvement.
So hearing you talk, Clay, actually reminds me of another one that we did, right? Actually, as I first started working with rental property owners, which was being able to charge under a security deposit for actual work performed by the landlord of a property. So previously under law, we could not do that. You had to hire outside help to change, to fix a wall if a wall had gotten destroyed in the tenancy of an individual, but we changed the law so that you could do actual and measurable, I think those were the terms there, costs if you've done the work yourself as a landlord. So that was a big one.
I'd like to take a moment to tell you about Green Property Management. Not only do they manage everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area, they also manage my entire portfolio. So I can tell you from personal experience that their unique flat fee management style is worth a closer look. If you feel that your property isn't operating to its fullest potential, then Green Property Management can help you take a holistic approach that will save you money, eliminate your headaches, and increase your net income. And if you're a property manager interested in applying Green Property Management's model, give them a call at 1-866-95-GREEN or visit them on the web at greenpropertymgt.com.
Tabitha, can you give us kind of the elementary school education version or the Schoolhouse Rock version of how a bill becomes a law, or how like this legislation moves through at the state level to actually become a law that affects landlords, and where you are in the process of that?
Sure. Lobby 101. There are 4,600 bills that have been introduced typically in a session. I mean, it's just a ridiculous amount of bills. So you've got legislators who are introducing something new every day. You've got senators. I'm going to call one out here, Senator Pete Lucido, who's super proud that he introduces more bills than anybody else in the last year. Each year he introduces even more than the year before. And what happens is that you have 110 representatives and 38 senators, and they each have constituents who come to them, or advocacy groups that come to them, or lobbyists, me and other lobby firms in Lansing that come to them with an idea or a problem that they're representing. In our case, the lobbyist representing an association or a company, another individual, and there might be a law that's blocking them from doing business in a way that's beneficial to both the company and the community, or to the company and the state. Or you've got a constituent who's got an issue because something happened to them and they want you to change it. We'll go my role, because that's what I know best. So let's say we had an issue with a municipality who was coming in to inspect rental housing if the ownership changed. So if it was Tabitha Zimny, property owner, to Tabitha Zimny LLC, they would consider it a change in ownership and come in to re-inspect, which means that they were charging inspection fees, and then possibly even re-inspection fees, even if they just inspected the property the year prior. We knew that this was a problem. We found a legislator that would be willing to sponsor this, and typically like to go to the committee that it's going to go through. So making sure that we are knowing those representatives and senators on the committee. In this case, it's a local government issue. And so we went to the chair of Senate Local Government, Senator Dale Zorn, to talk to him about the problem. Sat down a couple times, worked with we have the Legislative Service Bureau, and they draft all the laws. They're a bipartisan, nonpartisan entity by the state who is made up of, I think, just a lot of really, really smart people who know statute in and out and are able to draft a bill that we then get and can give input on before it's introduced. That bill gets introduced, in this case, it's Senate Bill 692. Currently going through the committee process, and then it has to go first referred to a committee and go through a committee hearing. We did, in fact, have a committee hearing on this a few weeks ago. All the interested parties came to testify either in support or opposition and fill cards out of support or opposition that are read in the committee hearings. We have negotiated some additional language that makes the bill even better moving forward, and actually is a compromise with the other stakeholders, including the Michigan Municipal League, and in this case, the Township Association, who originally opposed, and we got to a neutral position with some changes in the bill, which actually retain the original purpose. So now that's been passed out of committee. It's referred to the full Senate. The Senate, I get to work where I interject myself in both the committee process in educating all those committee members before the bill comes up for a hearing, as well as when the bill's ready for a vote. I like to make sure I get a vote count before that committee hearing happens so that we know how it's going to turn out, and we make sure to assure the sponsor and the chairman that we have enough votes on that committee to move forward. Then I do the same thing in the Senate, making sure to work with the leadership in the Senate on both the Republican and the Democratic side to make sure their caucuses are aware of what the bill does, and ultimately to obtain support from as many individuals as I can possibly obtain support from in those respective chambers. So in the Senate, we would see the bill go forward and get passed at a second and third reading, and then it's referred over to the House, where the committee process starts up right again. The House is a little bit more complicated. There are more people, 110 representatives there. So, and they have a two-committee process. So we'll go through local government and work with Chairman Jim Lower, as well as the committee members there. It's going to be my job to bring Clay to town, and we'll go around and talk to all those representatives and make sure that they're aware of what the bill does before it comes up for a hearing. Now that we have neutrality from the other stakeholders, we should have a pretty quick hearing, and then the bill is referred to Ways and Means. So just like the federal level, we have a committee on Ways and Means where if a policy committee passes a bill out and it's highly controversial, Ways and Means will hear more testimony on that bill. If it's not, they will typically review the bill as sort of a second set of eyes before it goes to the whole House floor. Because there are so many bills introduced each year, the House leadership at this point thought the Ways and Means was another set of eyes, so that when it got to the floor, that caucus and those legislators could absolutely trust that the bill was solid and that there were no new amendments needed and that everything had been flushed out in the committee process. So then we go to the full House floor. We work with both caucuses, leaders in both caucuses, to make sure that they can speak about it and their members have any questions answered that need to be answered on the bill if they weren't on those committees. And then ultimately it's passed out of the House and goes back to the Senate, gets enrolled, and heads to the governor, who has 14 days to sign a bill. So it doesn't stop there. We start calling the governor and calling all of her policy folks and making sure that they're aware of all the work we've put in, and that this, is good for the state and move on forward.
Wow, that is a huge gauntlet to have to run through. And it's amazing anything ever happens and that any laws ever get passed.
A lot of listeners tell me that they're interested in learning more about multifamily and apartment investing, but they just don't know where to start. Well, if you're looking for a comprehensive blueprint, then you should definitely check out Rod Cleef's Multifamily Bootcamp, happening May 1st through 3rd in Orlando, Florida. Rod personally teaches all 3 days, and you'll learn how to analyze and negotiate a deal, how to structure structure and fund your investment, build a team, and raise private money. You'll also learn how to develop a multimillionaire mindset, grow your network, and ultimately your lifetime cash flow. For more information, go to rodsbootcamp.com. You'll also receive a $100 discount by entering the code RPOA.
Clay, in a nutshell, explain. So Tabitha just explained the process, and you related it to the LLC bill. Explain in a nutshell what the LLC bill actually is, and what it means to landlords.
Tabitha was speaking of a bill related to rental inspections and whether or not those should occur if you just have a change of ownership from like my personal ownership to an LLC or a trust or something like that. We do have other bills that are around whether or not you need an attorney when you go to landlord-tenant court for an eviction case. And as it stands in most larger courts especially, they're going to require you to have an attorney if you have an LLC. We've been trying for years to get that through. So as you just heard from Tabitha, you go through that whole process over a 2-year cycle. So the legislature has a 2-year cycle, and within that 2 years, you have to do that whole thing that Tabitha just talked about in order to get a bill passed. Unfortunately, sometimes Tabitha has to work at 3 o'clock in the morning on the last day of that cycle to try to get one of our bills through. And this is an example of what happened in the last session, not this session, but with the LLC bill in the last session. We got it through the House, and then it went to the Senate Judiciary Committee, and it sat there for quite a while, and it got stuck there for quite a while. And we thought we had the votes at one point to get it out of committee, and then right at the end of the session, we found out we didn't, which was very frustrating because I think we thought at that point in time anyway that we finally had got this thing to the point where it was going to succeed and the governor would sign it. But it got stuck because one person on the committee decided it wasn't going to go anywhere. And so we spent a lot of time, almost for 2 years, getting it to that point, and then it gets stalled out. And that was as close as it ever got to passing. So this year, with the LLC bill, we've got it through the House again, which is great. It's now in the Senate Judiciary Committee again. I guess we don't have 100% assurance yet that it will get out of the committee, but we're going to make a heck of an effort to try to get it out of the committee. And at some point, we might have to call our members upon our members to call the legislators on the committee and say we really need this bill to get it out of committee, but we don't know if that's true yet. It has heard testimony. I would say that I guess there wasn't a lot of opposition except from the Judges Association, which maybe we took a little bit of the wind out of their sails with our testimony. Well, at least we hope we did. Because as probably a lot of landlords know, most of these cases end in default or by some kind of consent agreement, and rarely do you need an attorney involved. So,
and in a nutshell, what exactly does that mean to landlords?
Well, in a nutshell, it would mean that if you decide to transfer your properties into an LLC, or you currently hold your properties in an LLC, you would no longer be obligated to hire an attorney to go to court for you if it's a single member LLC or a husband and wife owned LLC, and the case is not in excess of the small claims limit. So those are the two criteria that you need to meet in order to not have to have an attorney. We've taken years to get to the point where we can get everybody to agree that that might be okay if we had it in that way. So it could save a lot of money, not just for the landlords, but for the tenants. Having an attorney involved in an eviction case is just going to add to the money judgment ultimately that you're going to get. And it increases rents across the board if landlords have to hire expensive legal help to do these deals. So it's good for everybody, ultimately.
Well, let's get into some of the particular issues that are out there, starting with emotional support animals. Tabitha, tell us how you're working with the RPOA right now on legislation affecting that.
Sure. So in addition to working with the Rental Property Owners Association, and actually one of my roles there is to make sure I get the support of other stakeholders, so other associations that are represented downtown. Lansing. And one of those is the Michigan Realtors Association, as well as the Property Managers Association of Michigan and the Apartment Association. So the property managers have really taken the lead on the emotional support animals. But it's certainly an issue that's very near and dear to our members' hearts here. And I've heard so many stories that I could have never even fathomed would be possible.
Let's hear one of those stories.
All right. So I had somebody come in and tell me how they had found a student rental house with 15 cats. It was not even rental turnover time. They just had a subleaser because this particular tenant went on a study abroad. So she came, before she left for a study abroad, she was going to leave the cats there and came to the landlord with an itemized letter that she got from emotionalserviceanimals.com. Don't confuse this for an ad for those guys. And it had listed every cat's name and what it did for her emotional needs. And this is something she paid around $75 for after she was found with the 15 cats. She had gotten the cats for free because she had found, basically on the side of the road, one of those boxes with a bunch of kittens. And the landlord could not evict her with the emotional support animal cats. He was able to negotiate with her, but with an attorney present, to reduce the number of cats, but had to ultimately allow. And when she left, these cats absolutely destroyed the property, as animals tend to do if left alone and not supervised properly. So we have a bill that like I said, Property Managers Association has really taken the lead on, and this is the second session that there's been a bill to regulate emotional support animals and make criminal penalties for falsifying emotional support animals. What we're really hearing, especially from college towns landlords, is that they're typically given an online letter the day after they find out that their tenant has an animal illegally in the property. Their lease said that there were no animals, or they were approached, they found an animal and said, all right, well, now you have to pay the pet fee, which is $50 extra per month plus an additional deposit, and then the tenant will come back with this letter from the online emotional support animal. Or I think there are a dozen of these entities out there that are granting emotional support needs and prescriptions rather for tenants to have pets, without much actual medical basis in this. So what we sought to do in the legislation, and been working on many iterations of this, it continues to be negotiated, and I think it's still in process. It's currently in the House Judiciary Committee, but we're seeking to make sure that there's a bona fide doctor-patient relationship, which is inherent in some significant penalties for the provider, the healthcare provider, if they falsify such a relationship. It's already established in law, in other statutes, this protected bona fide doctor-patient relationship. We're making sure that if the entity that issues the prescription is out of the state, that they have a 180-day patient relationship that includes frequent visits and treatments for specific issues. While this does sound very much like it might run afoul to HIPAA, it does not, in the fact that if you have an emotional support animal and you have a diagnosis for an emotional support animal, under this bill, you would have to authorize your landlord the ability to speak to the healthcare provider to just verify that it's an actual prescription and an actual need. The landlord doesn't get to opine upon whether or not you have this need, just that the healthcare provider has done its due diligence in investigating and treating you, so that if you do end up with a prescription for an emotional support animal, it is valid. There are some criminal penalties for providers, healthcare providers, if they falsify the information or falsify the need for an emotional support animal. And then again, there's the authorization for a landlord to have direct contact with a healthcare provider, or to receive information from a tenant directly from the healthcare provider, and making sure that that is valid information and not something completed by the tenant. and falsified that way.
So where is that in the pipeline?
So that is actually up next Tuesday to be voted out of House Judiciary Committee. We've been successful. It will still have to go to the House floor. Judiciary is one of the 4 committees in the House that reports directly to the floor, so we get to skip Ways and Means at this point. Second committee process in the House. So we'll report it to the floor. The sponsor's working very hard to make sure that he's secured support from both sides of the aisle on this, and then hopefully quickly voted out of the House after that and headed over to the Senate. I think that this is an issue that every single legislator is hearing about from their constituents, and not many are coming at it from the tenant constituency, saying that they have to have emotional support animals through falsified online documentation. Really, the overwhelming census that I'm hearing from legislators is that this is something that needs to be handled and needs to be some perimeters put around in state law.
So there's a consensus that it's a no-brainer.
Yes, devil's in the details, all right? That's we've had the physician community come out and work on this as well. So originally they were opposed to the bills that were introduced last year in the Senate, but we've been able to get them to a point. I believe that on Tuesday we'll see the point of neutrality, or in continued work see neutrality from the physician groups to make sure that, they know that there might be people doing this who aren't actually investigating, and if they are, they should be held to criminal penalties. And if they aren't and it's a valid need, then that should be allowed as well.
Well, let's talk about short-term rentals, because that's also an issue that you're working with the RPOA on, and I'm sure other groups as well. Tell us what's going on in that area.
So this is another one of those areas that legislators are very much seeking some clarification in state law on, because they're hearing about it from both their local municipalities and their local landlords. There are 2 bills, competing bills, we'll call them right now. One is backed by the Michigan Realtors, and that's the bill sponsored by Representative Jason Shepard. And it bans the ban on short-term rentals. So coming out of Grand Haven, where this whole thing started, and Grand Haven, I believe, was the first municipality to ban short-term rentals as a commercial use of property. So they were banned in certain zones, and they used zoning as a regulating entity for short-term rentals, rather than any other mechanism or other ordinance of other regulation. So this bill, again, bans the ban on short-term rentals, as well as making sure to clarify in zoning that rentals of any type, long-term and short-term, are not considered commercial uses of the property. We are overall fans of this bill. As you can imagine, making sure that it's clear in statute that rentals are not commercial property is a great thing for us. And then you've got the other bill package, which is several bills, and that's sponsored by Representative Jim Lilly, who's actually from Grand Haven. And this one's backed, it's been negotiated by Michigan Municipal League as well as the restaurant and tourism industry. So it makes sure that all of short-term rentals are the taxes that are collected on hotels. So the tourism tax is collected as well on short-term rentals, which I think is something the industry actually agrees with. And we've seen that as a trend across the country. But in addition, it makes a new zoning of a short-term rental transient facility. So this is a new classification in the Zoning Enabling Act of what short-term rentals are, which gets around the commercial use or residential use of the property. It says that anyone can have a short-term rental for the first 14 days, whether that's over a year or packed right in for football season. But after that, they have to register with the municipality, and then there's some additional provisions in the bill that would regulate them further. We don't love this one as much because it does allow a regulation and disallowance in zones of short-term rentals. But we do advocate for short-term rentals to be used in Michigan, to be allowed in Michigan, to not be zoned out, but also for neighborhoods to assert really regulations on their own neighborhood rather than a city putting those regulations on them. So if a neighborhood decides that they don't want short-term rentals or rentals period, there are mechanisms currently in the Zoning Enabling Act that allow them to do so, but it's really driven from the individuals and the residents themselves and has to have the majority of those rather than for the city being the regulating entity for where short-term rentals can be. Because at that point, you're picking winners and losers and property owners. So there's been, I want to say, almost a year of negotiations between the Michigan Municipal League and the tourism industry and the Realtors Association. And so there were many meetings of the minds in that, and it's just sort of at an impasse. I know that the speaker has spoken to me directly and wanting to see if we can figure out some way to thread the needle here and find something that both sides can live with that is also good for Michigan and good for the industry. And something to that effect has not yet been introduced. I do think that in all my work with the Rental Property Owners Association and now the new Short-Term Rental Association of Michigan, there's a huge opportunity to bring something that both sides can live with that takes into account all considerations and concerns and can be the ultimately prevailing legislation that makes it easier for our municipalities to understand what's allowed and what's not, and also easy for property owners and investors to really be fruitful in Michigan in this industry.
Yeah, so Tabitha mentioned something that's really important for everybody to know. Just this weekend, we announced the creation of a new short-term rental association here in Michigan. It enables us to have a voice now on these issues instead of the realtors having to advocate for that, or the Rental Property Owners Association or other groups basically talking for the short-term rental owners. This will give us a chance to get a group of short-term rental owners in Michigan collectively to get their feedback on what they think would work, not work, and try to get some collective agreement that, as Tabitha mentioned, try to find a workable solution to this that all parties can go forward with. So it's very exciting. For those who have an interest in that association, we're offering a charter membership, meaning that if you want to be involved with it right up front, helping us build this organization and what it's exactly going to do other than just lobbying, we would love to have you on board. The charter membership is going to be $49.99, and if you join right away under that charter membership, it will be what you will pay for life on an annual basis, $49.99. Your dues would never go up. So getting right in up front, helping us build this thing is an advantage to that. We love folks to do that. We'll be rolling out a website soon for the Short-Term Rental Association, but we wanted a small core group of people to work with us initially to figure out what that's going to look like, what services and benefits we're going to provide. So hopefully over the next few months, we're going to get to that point. You'll be able to find us, but if you want to join sooner than that, certainly give our office a call at 616-454-3385. We can get you all set up. And if you're somewhere in Michigan, you want to participate in those meetings, we can work that out as well.
Cole, how many short-term vacation rental associations or professional organizations representing short-term owners are out there?
In our research, we found none, but however, Tabitha said this morning that she dug a little deeper and did find an organization somewhere here in Michigan. I'm not sure what they really look like or how many folks they have involved, and then there's maybe affiliated with another national group that we just couldn't find. So they may exist, but nobody knows about them, and we really don't know who's involved with those associations. So this is exciting here. We know we already have a lot of members who are jumping on board because they do short-term rentals. So we're going to quickly be able to get things going.
And this would be a group for anyone in Michigan who owns short-term rentals or wants to be a part of that?
Absolutely. Anybody in Michigan or anybody that is anywhere in the United States or otherwise that owns property in Michigan that they're using for a short-term rental may want to be a member and support us, because whether you're here in Michigan or not, if you own property, obviously you're going to get impacted by legislation that creates problems.
And Tabitha, how important is it to you to have a group like the Rental Property Owners Association or the Short-Term Rental Association to work with? And what other resources do you marshal to get a bill like you're talking about moving through the pipeline?
Sure. So I think it's incredibly important to have the industry speak up, right? So that we can make sure, I think what we're going to do is create a map. Clay might be hearing for this for the first time, but create a map of where all of our members of the Short-Term Rental Association are located so that we can share that with the legislators so that they know that it's affecting their area, and they've got constituents who care about this issue. I mean, I'm one voice. I'm a rather loud voice, so they do listen, but it is much more impactful when they get to hear from their constituents directly. So having an association like this is just going to be really, really helpful on this particular issue, as Rental Property Owners Association of Michigan has been when we do our calls to action, and we're able to really communicate with all 148 legislators, within one day. It's a lot for me to get around and talk to, but our calls to action, we're able to get it usually in a couple hours. So that's really, really quite helpful. And Clay does a great job of making sure that information gets out, is available on the website and in the publications from RPOA. I'm always an advocate for anyone who wants to become a member of the state board, come to Lansing and hear my spiel and talk about how important it is that they know their legislator and get involved. But really, the PAC is another way to get involved and be influential. Money doesn't buy votes, but it certainly buys access. And so when you contribute to the Rental Property Owners Association PAC, you're able to know that we're directing those funds to our supporters in the legislature, those who are advocating for personal property rights, for rental property, and making sure that they consider the effects of the industry on any piece of legislation that goes forward.
So that's a perfect introduction to the fact that February is our official PAC fundraising month, and we're doing that right now, and why we're here at the conference here in Grand Rapids. We encourage all rental property owners and real estate investors to consider giving money to the PAC. As Tabitha says, it doesn't buy votes, but what it helps us do is support legislators who are sympathetic to our issues, understand our issues, and are willing to fight for our issues and to go after bills that we might need to have happen. At the very least, it will at least open a door to us having a discussion with a legislator at some point. So it's really critical. It's part of the political process, as I'm sure you hear from time to time. We use those funds to support local candidates where we see they're needed, and from the RPOA in Grand Rapids perspective, which would be Kent and Ottawa County. We would also use it for state legislative seats, which is what we'll be doing this year. We'll be doing interviews of candidates probably late May, early June, and then deciding who we're going to contribute PAC funds to. It doesn't take a huge amount of money to get the support that we look for, or at least to get that door opened so that they will listen to us. So any amount that someone contributes is great. We kind of suggest $100. You can do that online at our website. So if you go to the RPOAonline.org, go to the bottom of the page, click on Government Affairs, you'll be taken to another page which will have a link there to the PAC contribution page. So all you need is a credit card. This kind of a little forewarning, it can't come from a corporation or a partnership or anything like that. It can come from an individual. It can come from an LLC, but we will attribute that donation from the LLC to one of the members of the LLC. So that's what has to be done, and we encourage everybody to jump on board and help us out. This is a big year. it wouldn't take much really to tip the balance of the House or the Senate, either way, at some point to make things either easier for us or make things more difficult.
And if someone is listening to this episode after February 2020, can they still go to the website and contribute to the PAC?
Absolutely. You can do that 365 days a year, any time of the night you want to do it. So if you wake up one night and you're getting scared about what the government's going to do to you, feel free to jump on board and ease your mind a little.
Well, okay, so speaking of being scared of what the government's going to do to us, let's talk about what is on the horizon. What are we looking out for, and what are we trying to prevent?
So I think that there's always a conversation centered around rent control in Michigan. And so when we saw the House under Democratic leadership, we had more rent control bills than we do currently, but they're still out there. And those are bills that we really like to just continually remind legislators and departments and about the effects of removal of rental control, the effects of rent control on the industry in general. I think that's something that needs to be reminded, because certainly there are other cases in big cities where it has been used or been discussed or is known about, and they think it might be a good reason or a good tool to bring to Michigan, but it's really upon us to make sure to communicate with legislators so that they know what's good for the industry that's going to keep affordable housing available in each of these cities, and rent control is not really part of it. We're looking out. We've been part of some lead package as well, some lead water bills and lead paint bills, and just making sure those are crafted in a way that's not detrimental, again, to affordable housing, because you can sort of put that as a theme throughout all of the legislation we work on. The lead paint, there is, I believe, a statement in one of the bills that calls for abatement, and really what we'd like to see in that is remediation, as it's the preferred and proven method in the industry, the rental industry, and it's been worked with municipalities and the statewide lead commission to make that the accepted term and the accepted procedure going forward.
Well, the package of bills, for the most part, is making some things that we can certainly live with, because the CDC changed the de minimis level of which a child can be poisoned before it's considered a concern, and that was from 10 micrograms per deciliter several years ago to 5. So one of the changes in the package of bills would be just to change the state to the same level as the CDC. The other one that we support proactively in the bill, and in fact encouraged legislators to consider, is what we're calling a paint tax, which is crazy, you would think, for a very conservative industry typically like rental property owners and real estate investors to encourage some kind of a new tax. But we get frustrated in the industry when they keep asking us to remediate and abate our homes or pay more for regular inspections in our rental properties because of lead situations, when what it really happens is we have to spend a lot of money on a home if we're required to do that, and it's no longer affordable. So we need funds from somewhere to do that. And we think this is the best solution. If a paint tax is put in place, there'd be a very small amount added to every gallon of paint commercially and residentially sold in the state that would go into a fund, and that fund would be available for property owners to basically get a grant to replace windows and doors and put siding on and do those other kinds of things that would abate the problem, as opposed to just patching the problem time and time again. And it would enable us to fix it, we guess, over the 20 or 30 year period with the numbers of houses built before 1978 in the state, with the amount of funds that would be generated from that tax. So that's a pretty positive approach, we believe.
Tabitha, when you are talking to lawmakers, and I'm sure those are some very interesting conversations, I'm wondering if you can give us any insight into how you approach those conversations and what you might say, especially if a lawmaker is introducing or on board with a bill that goes against what you would like to see. So
I think one of the things that I always I always do, and I would always recommend to any of our members or anyone willing to advocate on our behalf, is remember that these guys are just people, guys and girls, right? Gals. They have run because they believe wholeheartedly that they can make the state a better place, and they are typically business owners, and they are parents, and they are somebody else's kid, and they've got a family at home and a dog, and their dog brings them emotional comfort, but might not be classified as that emotional support animal. And they've got hobbies, probably just like you and me. So, except their hobbies also include knocking doors to get votes at this point. Things I really, remember in approaching legislators are that, and that they've got a reason that they are either supporting a bill or sponsoring a bill that is, opposed to what we would like to see. And so I strive to understand what their point of view is, why they feel very passionately about this particular issue, whatever issue it is, that so much so that they've sponsored a bill on that behalf. You'll find a lot if you just take the time rather than charge it in and say, this is a terrible bill and this could be really bad for industry. Say, hey, what's your reasoning? What's the background here? Talk to me about why you do this, and can we find another solution? I find that we're able to put our heads together and figure out who else we need to talk to find a solution. And there's always one out there, right? There's always a way to look at an issue in a different way and maybe even achieve the same goal, just not through the methods that may have been first demonstrated in a bill.
And then, Clay, I know it's not just the RPOA that's out there working with Tabitha. Who are some of the other partners that we have?
Well, I know Tabitha's mentioned the Property Management Association of Michigan. We do work closely with them. They'll be proactive in getting a bill, such as the emotional support animal bill. They'll communicate that to us, sometimes directly to me or through Tabitha, and run them by us so we make sure that the language isn't somehow contradictory to what we want as independent landlords or real estate investors. So it's really important that we work together on that, because we may have a bill as well that we want them to support. And we try very hard to be able to go to the committees together and say we support or oppose something. So those partnerships are extremely important so that the folks in Lansing understand us. It's not just one group of business folks. It's multiple groups. And we also work with the Apartment Association of Michigan. Tabitha mentioned them as well. The realtors are usually there with us. So we try to all get on the same page with bills. It can make a huge difference. And everybody has their own thoughts about what's good and bad about something as well, which is where Tabitha really, she's fabulous at, is bringing all the folks to the table, trying to find a compromise that works for everybody. And gets the job done either in opposing something or supporting something.
I'm going to add to that, the Michigan Bankers Association has been helpful. We had some squatter legislation a couple of years ago that we were able to do together, and the mortgage lending industry has been helpful in supporting our endeavors. But yeah, like Clay said, the realtors, the apartments, and the property managers, just a really good group of property advocates for affordable housing in Michigan, and we've done some really great things together.
Right. So what do you want our listeners to take away from this conversation? I mean, it sounds like it's important to be aware of what's going on at the legislative level. What would you like the call to action to be?
Well, I think they need to understand that without associations like ours, the RPOA of Michigan and others, that there's no one here to advocate for the industry, and they need to support us, and we need their membership in order to do that. And we also need PAC funds in order to do that. So you can't sit back and not be a member of an association and complain about nothing's being done on our behalf. Because if we go away because we don't have the funds to support the staff and to pay a lobbying firm in Lansing, then things are going to get a lot worse. So they really need to understand that and support an association at the local level in their area or the RPOA here in Grand Rapids.
And Tabitha, what would you like the listeners to take away from this?
Stay informed, stay involved, know your representatives and senators. Like Clay said, I echo all of those sentiments. But make sure you create a relationship and go to coffee hours so that you can let them know what you do and how important it is that they keep that in mind as they go through their daily business in Lansing.
Well, Tabitha and Clay, thank you for all the work you're doing on behalf of rental property owners and landlords and real estate investors across the state. It's been very interesting to hear about some of the legislation that you're fighting for or against and how you're helping the industry. So thank you very much.
Thanks for having us, Brian.
Thank you.
I want to thank everybody for listening to this episode. I'm your host, Brian Hamrick from Hamrick Investment Group, and you can find out more about me by going to higinvestor.com. That's higinvestor.com. And you can also ask questions and join us on Facebook by going to RPOA, Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast. This episode was sponsored by Green Property Management, managing everything from single-family homes to apartment complexes in the West Michigan area. Find out more at greenpropertymgt.com. And Rod Cleef's Multifamily Boot Camp happening May 1st through 3rd in Orlando, Florida. Go to rodsbootcamp.com and use the code RPOA to save $100.
You've been listening to the Rental Property Owner and Real Estate Investor Podcast, brought to you by the Rental Property Owner Association. You can find out more at rpoaonline.org. If you enjoyed this podcast, please go to iTunes to subscribe, rate, and review.